Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a quick review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Elecom EX-G trackball. So I know what you're thinking, Nick, trackball? Really? On your channel? Well, the thing is, I review everyday tools, right? And if you are a computationally minded person, the kinds of tools that you might use on a regular basis might be things like keyboards, or mice, or a trackball, which is a type of mouse for moving the cursor on your computer screen. And so I figured, hey, why the heck not? I've been using these things, I have strong opinions, I'll go on ahead and I'll make a review about it. So expect to see a couple of other computational input devices on the channel here from time to time. I'm still going to be doing my normal game with the pocket knives, watches, pens, etc. But I figured I'd throw a couple of these guys in here. Next thing, let's do some size comparison. Here it is against the Spyderco Delica pocket knife, as is tradition for the channel. The overall size of this guy, though, we are talking someplace in the vicinity of 4.75 inches on this length dimension. In terms of height, we are someplace around, 2 inches or so off the desk at its peak. And then in terms of the width of this guy, we're looking at something along the lines of, looks like maybe 3.5 inches or so, depending on how you want to measure it, right? It's kind of a weird shape. But nonetheless, it works well. And then finally, what the heck is a trackball? Many of you may have never seen a mouse that looks like this. Thing is, though, this isn't a conventional mouse. A conventional mouse, you actually move on the desktop, right? You put a pad down, or maybe not, and you just move this guy back and forth. And as you move this back and forth, up and down, the cursor moves back and forth, up and down. The problem with these, ergonomically speaking, with a conventional mouse, that is that you're doing a lot of this back and forth kind of motion. And especially if your wrist is at an unhealthy angle where it's bent up like this, that can actually be an ergonomic issue. I am a person who does a lot of writing, a lot of typing, a lot of mousing, especially now more than ever that I'm working from home, but still, this can over time lead to repetitive stress injuries. And so I've embraced alternate input devices as a way to make that better. And so a trackball actually turns that model on its head. Rather than rolling the mouse around and measuring the ball, instead you mull the ball around, so to speak. That's right, mice used to have balls. Well, the regular kind still do, but the computer kind used to have balls. In this case, what you actually do is to control the cursor. If I want to move the cursor up and down the screen, I roll this little sphere here in this direction. If I want to move it back and forth horizontally, I roll it in this direction. And as a result, I can curve the cursor into whatever order I'd like. And just by moving my thumb around, I'm able to move the cursor on the computer screen. This has the other buttons you might expect, a left click, a right click button. It has an additional third click button on the side here, as well as these two guys here, as well as an adjustment for low and high speed, high sensitivity, meaning when it's on low, it moves more slowly. Basically, the cursor moves less for every bit of ball movement, as opposed to high, where it's a little quicker. And then it does have a scroll wheel, allowing you to go up and down, as well as left and right, using this kind of a lateral motion. So that's how this guy works. And so let's go on ahead and talk about the good, the great, and the bad, and the ugly of this little guy, and I'll try and keep it relatively quick here. On the good side, ergonomically speaking, this is pretty well laid out. I have smaller hands than most. This is a problem for me in most things, part of the reason why ergonomics are a little tricky for me, right? But at the same time, it tends to work pretty well. The thumb is in a good position here to use this ball, and no problem with that. The click buttons are in a good position when I'm using my thumb on the ball, so I don't really have to move my hand all that much, and that is, by the way, one of the big advantages of a trackball. So you can keep your hand relatively solid on the desk, put it in a comfortable position, and then just use your hand to move things rather than having to move your whole arm around, right? So the ergonomics on this guy are absolutely solid. I appreciate that very much, and it works pretty well. And you can also get that each of the buttons has a finger, basically. So 1, 2, 3, and then the scroll can be index or middle, depending on how you're feeling that day. So I gotta say, comfort-wise, it's looking pretty good. Next thing, this is using a standardized battery format. In here goes a single AA battery. AA's are abundant, you can get them rechargeable, no complaints there. I very much appreciate they using a regular format and that they are just allowing you to swap those out, because like I said, rechargeable batteries, everybody should be using them. They are absolutely a beautiful thing, and I appreciate them having gone that route. Next thing, this does include a power switch on the bottom here. That is actually very useful because, for instance, some people might actually take this out and about with them, right? They might take this out to a cafe, set this guy up if you're feeling a little hip, and so you would turn this guy from the off button to low, and low here in this case means low battery usage, and high means high sensitivity, but you can change that, turn that off, just throw it back in the briefcase, and there you go. Next thing, this is a wireless transceiver. This is not a wired mouse. I'm going to see if I can get the transmitter out of here. It's a little tricky if you don't keep fingernails. But this little device here, this little dongle, just ends up going into your USB port. You just plug this into a USB port on the computer. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but they give you a nice little home for that to live in when it is out and about and not in your computer. And so you plug this into your computer, and then this guy connects straightforwardly. It acts just like any other mouse, and the wireless, the speed and latency is absolutely fine. So I appreciate that. And then this also allows you to have a much less cluttered desktop. It allows you to move this to wherever you'd like and kind of use it to move it around. You could even, set it down in your lap for a moment, set it down on something to put your hand in a different position if you're feeling your RSI, your repetitive stress injury, a little bit more. So that's very good. And then finally, I have to say, this is a relatively smooth ball. At the very, very low level, and one of the biggest issues you face with trackballs, that is you want them to be very smooth. You want to be able to make very small adjustments. And so you want them not to be stick slippy. And this is a little bit, but it's definitely gotten better as I've used it more. At that very micro level, there is definitely a little bit of stick slip going on there, but for the most part, it's been pretty solid. And so I got to say, I appreciate very much the trackball motion. I feel like they've done a pretty good job with that. And then finally, actually, I want to give a shout out to this sensitivity selector. This seems like it's not something that's super important, but it kind of is. Because if you're working across a very large desktop, you might want to have high sensitivity. So you can just kind of flick the ball and end up in the other corner of the screen where you need to. And you want to be able to move relatively quickly if you've got a lot of screen real estate. But there are going to be times when you're doing very tedious tasks. When you're, for instance, in a spreadsheet, trying to enter in individual values or something like that, where you're going to want to have very, very little motion per motion there. And so the ability to switch that sort of in real time is very nice and without substantially moving your hands. So to me, all of that is the good with this guy. Is ergonomically, it works pretty well in the hand. I like the fact that this is using a AA battery rather than some other unfortunate ugliness or proprietary thing, or plug it in to recharge sort of affair, because those are easy to get rechargeable. I like the fact that they're using a wireless receiver, and the ball on it is relatively smooth, with this little mode selection being a great thing. So to me, at least, all that is on the good side. On the bad side, unfortunately, there are some downsides to this. One of them is that it is a relatively flat thing, and it expects your wrist to be pretty flat on the desk. And this is totally fine for some people, for some desk heights. If your desk is at a level that is right in front of you, then this could totally work well. This could totally be ergonomic. But for the majority of people, their arm, their arm will be coming up, down onto the desk, coming down onto the, and that leads to this kind of a wrist position, and that is not generally a comfortable thing. And I know what you're thinking, Nick, I do it all the time. It's fine. Yeah, the thing is, if you do that 8 hours a day, every day, you may end up with some issues there, especially if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. So I would have preferred for them to allow a little bit more adjustment. For instance, one way to do this, and a lot of people actually accomplish this via 3D printing. They will 3D print a base that holds this guy up at an angle, and that allows your wrist to be at a more natural kind of resting on the table angle rather than being in this kind of a situation, especially with the wrist up onto this relatively high mouse. The fact is, it needs to be a little bit big, but it needs to have a little bit of beef in this direction. But yeah, it ends up putting your wrist at kind of a weird angle. So I kind of wish that they had adapters included to hold this guy at a more natural angle for your wrist to sit on a table. I think that would be a nice thing, and that would be a major ergonomic win. Next thing, like I said, this can be a little bit like the area where it's very difficult to show this off, right? Especially filming on a phone, but nonetheless, it can definitely be at the very low level. There is a stick sliption. That means that as you are kind of moving things along, especially if you're in high mode, but even still, where a little tiny jump will be unpredictable. It'll kind of jump forward a little bit more than you expect. It'll be kind of a quantized motion, jump, 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 rather than a smooth, very fine motion. And this can be very frustrating, especially if you're trying to do a task that involves very precision clicking, where you are trying to move that. One advantage is that one advantage of having the low mode is that it allows you to do that and then stay on target, because remember, if you move the ball at all with your hand as you go up to click, that's not necessarily ideal, but nonetheless, you get yourself a little tiny bit of jumption there as you're doing that, and that makes this guy a little bit less, frankly, enjoyable to use on a regular basis. Next thing on this guy that is most certainly a downside is the scroll wheel here. It's a very rough scroll. What I don't mean by that is, like, you can hear it. it doesn't have any inertia to it. And as a result, even with your scroll wheel settings turned all the way up, this is, you will scroll for hours to get to the end of a long document. Way back in the day, Logitech, I think, had a mouse that had an inertial scroll ball, where it actually had some beef to it and was running on a bearing, so that you could either click it in to get a full, basically to get a, oh, by the way, you can click using the scroll wheel with this guy. That's yet another click. But anyways, where you could either get a kind of spin it and let it go kind of scroll action, or you could get a, you know, step, but this is very stepwise and very slow. So if you're trying to scroll through something long, at the end of the day, you're doing a whole bunch of this, and that's not exactly an amazing motion there. Then finally for me, the deal breaker. The reason I am not going to be using this in the long term is the reception of this. This is a wireless transceiver. And this guy is here. Let's, come on, get out of there, you little bugger. Anyways, this little wireless transceiver goes in your computer. Here's the thing, though. This is the most anemic transmitter I have ever used. I've used a bunch of mice in my day, so to speak. But for whatever reason, Elecom's wireless transmitters are very low power or something like that. What that means is that if I plug this guy into the very natural position of, like, right behind my monitor, where I usually plug in a mouse, it doesn't have enough room, basically. It doesn't transmit all the way through there. And in fact, if I bring the mouse underneath the monitor on the other side, then it works fine. But if I have the mouse in my normal position, that's problematic. If I were to put like a bottle of water between the transmitter elsewhere in my computer, like out of line of sight, that can often be enough to break that. Even things like moving my hand, this is just a very weak transmitter. And unfortunately, this is something I've also had with the Elecom Huge, which is another version. That's right, the name of it is literally huge, right? And so as a result, this means that it's not super reliable if you're looking for any kind of distance. You need to have more or less direct line of sight. And in fact, to use this guy, what I ended up doing is running a USB extension cord to this so that the transceiver was just a little bit away from the piece, right? That's not good. That is absolutely not good. And as a result, you can buy a wired version of this, and I would advise that you do. Because very often it was tricky to tell whether I was having trouble moving it because of transceiver issues or because of the thing itself wasn't registering. So the wireless transmitter on this guy, as well as on the other Elecoms I've tried, are very poor, and as a result, I would definitely go wired for this. And so, to me, at least, all of that is, oh, on the price side, by the way, it's reasonably good. I want to say this particular model goes in the $40 range. Yeah, it's okay. Trackballs are weird pieces anyways, but yeah. So, to me, that all is the bad, right? Is that ergonomically speaking, this particular angle doesn't super work. It's not necessarily amazing, and I kind of wish they offered you some adapters that would allow you to tent it up a little bit, or even gave you tenting legs or something like that. That might make it a little bit easier. The scroll wheel is very slow, and the wireless adapter is not all that good at actually transmitting, which is kind of the one, the one job it has. Final conclusion. Look, this is actually a lot better than some of the other trackballs I've tried in the past, right? It works reasonably well. It's got good ergonomics here. It doesn't require you to have really long fingers, which is definitely a problem that some of the trackballs have. And it is reasonably flush down to the desk, which means that your wrist is at less overpronation than usual, but it's still there a little bit. And overall, build quality, such price, not so far out of line, right? I'm reasonably impressed. Unfortunately, it's got some major downsides in that the sensitivity can be a little bit tricky. The ergonomics aren't necessarily amazing, but most of all, the wireless is a big problem. And ultimately, that's what killed the crab for me. The wireless just made this a non-thing. This is not something I was particularly interested in doing, and wasn't something I was particularly interested in keeping around for the long term. So that's kind of my perception here. It's an interesting trackball. And if you're doing anything like this, I would go wired. That's almost certainly a better approach for you. Cable management aside, that's definitely a win, but it's fine. It's a working little trackball, and especially if you're willing to go that extra mile to make yourself, like 3D print yourself an adapter, or heck, go down to your shop and cut out some wood that'll work in the same way, then you're going to end up with something good. But otherwise, honestly, I don't know that I'm going to recommend this guy, and so the EX-G is fine. But I don't think I would go the extra mile to pick one of these guys up. So there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.